Hello, I'm Britt Isenberg, Leadership Program Director for the Gettysburg Foundation. I'm here with cavalry historian extraordinaire Bob O'Neill, who wrote the book Small But Important Riots. And it's an honor to be standing here today at the Goose Creek Bridge. Bob, can you tell us a little about where we're at?
We're standing, as you said, at Goose Creek Bridge over Goose Creek. This creek winds all through this area. It actually empties into the Potomac at Edwards Ferry. So where the armies cross, where the Union Army crosses into Maryland to get to Gettysburg, they're going to cross at the confluence of Goose Creek and the Potomac River. The bridge was built in about 1805, so it's very old, very historic. It has seen much of America's history to this point, and would have seen a lot of troop movements during the war, especially during the Gettysburg campaign.
We'll spend some more time on that in just a little bit here. But so our series is called Faces on the Front Lines. And we're trying to dive a little bit deeper into what the personal experience of different individuals that participated in the campaign might have been like. Do you have any stories you'd be willing to share with us? As I understand, you've got a story about a trooper in the 6th New York Cavalry. You'd be willing to share with us?
Sure. Britt, this is a story that was not in the book.
The best kind. Here we go.
There you go. As you know, we run into word count issues and that type of thing, so it didn't get in there. But the more I looked at it, it's a story that I'm very happy to share. Thomas Hathway had been born to English parents. Although he is born in the United States, as I understand it, he had to become a citizen back then. He becomes a citizen in 1848. He gets married in 1848 to a lady by the name of Esther Baker from New Jersey. As near as we can tell, and my wife does most of this work on Ancestry, he's living in Brooklyn and working as a tailor.
Okay.
And there is a fire that encompasses about 15 acres of the city of Brooklyn, including his shop and probably their home.
Oh, wow.
And they moved to Pennsylvania as a result of that. He has 2 daughters in 1863, one of whom I believe is 12 and the youngest one is 3. And he's a very, as I near 70, I hesitate to say he's a very old man, but for a soldier in that period of time, he enlists. We don't have a date of birth for him, but his service card suggests that he enlisted at the age of 35. So he would have been a very old man compared to who his comrades are.
Sure.
He's promoted.
Me feel old too. Okay.
He's promoted to sergeant in November of '62. And he is out here with Tom Devon's brigade, and all your listeners are going to have a great knowledge of what Devon does at Gettysburg and his brigade. And on the night of June 18th, he has been sent with the brigade, Devon, to assist the regular cavalry brigade in blocking Thoroughfare Gap. So again, that suggests the importance that Hooker placed on screening and preventing a surprise attack rather than scouting. And he writes a letter back to his wife while he's up there at the Gap. And with your permission, I'll read a part of that, and I'll read a part of a couple of other letters.
Please.
It says, "There is fighting going on all around us. We can hear the cannon. I am wet through now. I'm happy to say for last night we had the first rain since May 6th, and there had been a severe drought. All these roads have been covered with dust. Dust had played a critical role in the fight at Aldie." And I should also say that on June 17th, as you know through the work of one of your guide friends, Jeff Harding, the heat index for June 17th is at least 118 degrees that they're fighting in, probably more. The rain has started to temper the dust and the temperature a little bit. He says, "The enemy are in Pennsylvania. I am not sorry. It will wake up," and this is interesting to me that he would use this phrase because it's something I think of today. "It will wake up all deadheads at home and make them feel it. They need something severe to wake them up. I will write as soon as I can get a chance. I send you some flowers gathered on the battlefield of Bull Run." They'd all moved across the battlefield coming up here. "I am hopes that the Rebs will get all they want this time. That is a good thrashing. Kiss the pets for me, for I think of you nearly all the time." So he has that letter with him in his pocket for a couple of days. They will be in this fight with Buford's division on the 21st, moving to my left up here. They'll be in the fight out of the Trap Road. And on the 22nd, Pleasanton, having learned what he needed to learn, will pull the whole cavalry corps back towards Aldie. They'll move on 2 roads. Now, interestingly, for where we are standing and to make some point connection with this story, the accounts are very sparse. We know very little of what happens on June 22nd. It's a very, very short chapter in my book. But the word is that the Federals are now going through this choke point of this bridge. Stuart's men are going to press their attack here. They're going to have to be held off by John Taylor's brigade of cavalry, 1st Pennsylvania, 1st Maryland, and others. So they probably are fighting a defensive stand along those ridges to my right, as the rest of the command gets across this bridge. They will go back into camp just west of Aldie, establish a picket line, and the 6th New York will be at a place known as Dover's Mill. They've gone into bivouac, and to the north, Tom Mumford with the 5th Virginia Cavalry decides to make one last attack across Goose Creek. Attack the pickets of the 9th New York Cavalry. They'll have a fight there. Very sharp. One of their majors in the 5th Virginia Cavalry is killed there. And for a long time we thought that was basically maybe the last casualty, not a mortally wounded soldier who died, but the last actual person to receive an injury had been that major. In actuality, Thomas Hathway may be the last man. So he still has a letter in his pocket. So he adds on June 22nd a PS. So they're already back. They've survived all of this retreat. And he says, at Dover's Mill, on our way to Snicker's Gap, I am well. Expect to meet or catch the Rebs today. Weather wet. Love to my dear ones. He hasn't mailed it yet. He thinks they're going to go to the northwest of where we're standing to go after the troops that had just attacked the 9th New York.
Yeah.
And actually, they're going to attack towards Middleburg. That's where the Confederate picket line is. Now, he, as it turns out, had been given authority to stay behind. They knew his horse was lame from the retreat. They couldn't keep up with the command, but he insisted upon going. When they get towards Middleburg, the Confederates on this road will attack them, drive them back, and because his horse can't keep up, his comrades think he is captured.
Okay.
In fact, he's mortally wounded. So he will be taken to a home in Middleburg that was serving as a bit of a hospital, and we'll pick up the story from another side of it. In Middleburg was a doctor by the name of Dr. Francis Powell. He had received his medical degree from the University of Pennsylvania in the 1830s. He's about 53 years old, I think.
Okay.
51, 53. He's married to Harriet Powell. She's about 48. They have had 8 children, as near as I can tell, several of whom die in infancy. The other interesting thing is that we now believe, for a long time, I believed and others, that Jeb Stuart had made his headquarters at what we know today as the Red Fox Inn in Middleburg,
yeah,
right on Route 50. They'd been there on June 17th when Federal cavalry comes into the town and forces him to retreat. We have a lady's diary who lived in Middleburg, had a store probably near where this hospital is, who wrote, no, Stuart made his headquarters at the home of Dr. Powell. So Dr. Powell's home, today things are a little bit different in the town, but it's on the southeast corner as you enter the town of Middleburg from the east.
Okay.
And all around behind it is a series of cemeteries. So several of their children are buried there. Obviously, Mrs. Hathaway doesn't know anything about what's happened. The letter has not been mailed to this point, as near as we can tell. So again, if you don't mind, I will read a couple more letters.
Please.
So Powell had been arrested by the Federals twice. In 1862, a Federal patrol had come through here and had arrested him because Middleburg was used as a massive field hospital, if you will, after the Manassas campaigns, after the Maryland campaign. It actually becomes a point of contention between Robert E. Lee and Dr. Guild, who runs the Confederate Medical Service. Why are these soldiers being left in Middleburg to be harassed by the Federals? So once Mosby begins acting against the Federals in January of '63, the federal presence through here becomes almost a daily event. And they, you know, from a military, it sounds like harassment now, but militarily, every time they parole those prisoners, it keeps them out of Confederate service that much longer. So that gets back to Lee, and he's very upset. Where that all stands at this point, we think most of them are gone. But on April 1st, Mosby hits the 1st Vermont Cavalry up near Drainesville, up by the Potomac River, northeast of where we're standing, and inflicts a very embarrassing defeat on them. So the Federals send multiple patrols out to try and trap him, one of which is the early Michigan Brigade under Joseph Copeland. They will come into Middleburg, and they will arrest Dr. Powell a second time. So he's arrested early April, taken to Old Capitol Prison for the second time, and we can read his letters asking to be released. They're in the National Archives. Your readers can find them on Fold 3. He makes no apologies for who he is. He says, he talks about being a secessionist. He said, but I am not a commissioned officer. I'm not commissioned as a doctor in the Confederate service. I'm a contract surgeon asked to provide help to those men in this town. And he believes that under that authority, he should be released. And he will be released, I believe, May 20th. So just over a month before Hathway is wounded, he's released from D.C. and makes his way home. So we have that kind of background for his feeling.
Sounds like this might be just in the nick of time. I'm curious where the story goes from here. So
So in an undated letter of July 1863, she doesn't include a date, Dr. Powell's wife writes to Mrs. Hathaway. And we have that letter because it's in the Hathaway collection of letters. And I will just read part of it. It says, it becomes my painful duty to inform you that your husband died June 23rd at a hospital in this place. And then skip forward a bit. She says, of course, as Southern people, we are all secessionists. So there's nothing, they're not backing away from their feelings. But I assure you that every care and attention was bestowed upon your husband, both by Dr. Powell, who is a Confederate surgeon here, and by the ladies who attended the hospital. Mr. Hathaway expressed a perfect willingness to die. His only regret was that he could not again see his wife and children. That letter, as I said, we don't know when it's going to get there, but she will continue. After he was prepared for burial, I placed upon his breast a beautiful collection of flowers and cut off the lock of hair which I enclosed to you. I did this because I have sons in the army whose sad death I may hear any moment, and I deeply sympathize with you. Now, it appears that the timing is close to the Battle of Gettysburg, because she writes, a battle is now being fought in Pennsylvania, and before many days I too may be bowed down with bitter sorrow and affliction. She then adds, interestingly, a P.S. that says, I hope you will receive this. I send it by a northerner. So when you think about it, obviously she could not send this just by dropping it in the local mailbox. So she has a connection to get it back across the Potomac River. She sends it to somebody who she identifies. I've not tried to identify him further yet. In Leesburg, who then gets it across to somebody at Point of Rocks, Maryland, and then it gets up to Pennsylvania.
My, amazing. That's one of those details you kind of let slide and forget about it in the moment, right?
Exactly. So she provides that information, and also interestingly, she signs her name as Mrs. Dr. Powell, so very formal. Now, at some point in here, Mrs. Hathaway will get a letter from a friend of her husband's in the regiment, who had also been captured at some point. He doesn't say when. But after the Battle of Gettysburg, he writes to assure her, look, your husband, we are certain, is alive. We're only certain he was captured. He couldn't keep up. He explains how he had been told you don't need to go, but he tries very hard to assure he's alive. Well, she may or may not know now that he's dead, because we don't know how these letters get there. The only other letter from Mrs. Powell is the following May, about May 30th. So now with well into the Overland campaign. And she writes, I am in deep affliction. My dearly loved young son, the pride of his mother's heart, only 19 years old, was instantly killed in action at Plymouth, North Carolina on the 20th of last month and buried there far, far from home. My other son was captured eight months ago and ever since has been in prison, first in Washington City, which would have been Old Capitol Prison where her husband had been. And father, and now at Point Lookout. He's only 17, has never been in the Army, and was captured on his way home from school. He is deaf and consequently unfit for service.
Wow.
So everything she had predicted in the first letter has now come true, and it kind of, I think, explains the delay.
Yeah.
She goes into more detail about how this has affected her. She's been very under the weather, unable to write. But it also suggests what she writes after this is that Mrs. Hathway has sent her a letter.
Yeah.
Which we don't have. And so apparently asking for more information, and so Mrs. Powell writes back, his wound was not very painful and he did not suffer long. Whenever I visit our cemetery, I see his grave, for I have 5 children buried there.
Wow.
And she hopes to move her son back from Plymouth, North Carolina. I don't believe that ever happens. I hope that yourself and little ones are well and have been cared for by him who has promised to be husband to the widow and a kind father to the fatherless. Another interesting point is that now where she signed the first letter as Mrs. Dr. Powell, she now signs us as Harriet Powell.
Okay.
So that formality has released a little bit, has relaxed. They now have another bond, and she again identifies how she gets this letter north, who is going through to get north and what have you. So I thought it was an interesting story.
That's incredible.
To my understanding, the cemetery where Hathaway was buried is still a very large cemetery. Immediately behind their house, when you walk out what we believe is their house, you cross the street, that's the cemetery.
Okay.
But it's not identified. So he's either in an unmarked grave there, or if he was removed back to a national cemetery, he was removed as an unknown. So we don't know where he's at.
Okay. Well, so just to be clear though, we're still missing that letter from Mrs. Hathaway, correct?
It would be interesting to
just want to make sure everybody heard that in case. You never know what's going to drop out of an attic somewhere. So
turn up on eBay somewhere or something else.
It's happened before, right? So
the other thing that's worth pointing out, and a friend pointed this out to me, is the Powell's own land very close to where we're standing. Now they came from a pretty prominent family. It was a long-standing family in the area. They own land near this bridge. They own land east of here. So there's a connection again to where we're standing, and that probably just happens a couple miles east of here.
The other thing too is, so the campaign of course marches on from here, but this is not the last time that either of these bodies of troops will end up in the Loudoun Valley. Am I correct on that?
Absolutely, and even before I get to that, we should remember that when McClellan advances back after the Maryland campaign, they advance right over this ground. The cavalry knew this ground because they'd fought over almost some of the exact ground in October and November of 1862. And then they will come back through here, the Union Army, right after Gettysburg. So while Lee's moving down again through the Shenandoah Valley, or up the Shenandoah Valley, so I don't get corrected there, the Federal cavalry is leading the advance of the Army right through this area. All they can do is reverse their roles. You know, it's now the Federal cavalry screening the mountain gaps to prevent a surprise attack from the Confederates. John Mosby is going to be active here. He's going to capture some men, including an officer, at this bridge during that period of time. So all this ground stays significant and important throughout the war.
Yeah, very good.
And throughout the campaign especially.
Well, you heard it. Come on out and explore it, folks. Bob, I just want to say thank you sincerely. It's truly been a pleasure to spend some time with you, as it always is.
Thank you for the invitation. Thanks to all of you.